Right, Condeco are a workplace technology company. We help organisations all over the world measure their space and manage their space. It's the measurement of space we're going to be talking about today. Historically, and some of you may have heard of us before, the management of space is the bit that we've done a lot of. Room booking and desk booking and helping organisations push up utilisation, make better use of their space. But over the last few years, we've been doing occupancy studies using sensors to help organisations get a handle on exactly how well utilised every desk is within their building, each department, each floor, each bank of desks, the meeting rooms, how well utilised they are, how well occupied they are, how many are in them. And we're now able to take customers on a bit of a journey where we can say, well, you're not using your space correctly, you can get better utilisation out of it, you can fit more people in the building, you can take less space, and then provide some of the tools to manage that better. So I'm going to go through some statistics that we found over the last couple of years on office occupancy. We're going to have a look at different ways of measuring space, and some of these things you'll be doing and some of these things you won't be doing. And we'll have a look at a couple of case studies and a little bit look at product, but this isn't a sales pitch. But hopefully by the end of this session you'll understand a bit more about the different ways of managing space and maybe have a couple more tricks to go into your toolbox when you look at ultimately designing the right workspace for your customers. Done this bit, we'll move on. So these are the bits that we do, connected products and tying it all together. Effectively, this is the piece that we're really focusing on today about understanding occupancy of buildings. As I mentioned before, our core business for 10 years has been room booking and desk booking and digital signage that goes with that, the screens you get on the outside of meeting rooms. And we've been doing this for organisations with anything between 200 employees and 500,000 employees in all parts of the world. We have offices in all continents, and we find very similar trends in terms of utilisation. I say similar because Dublin is different, very interesting set of circumstances that has happened here over the last 5 years recently, which has led to a massive rise in commercial property costs. And I'm sure this impacts most of your jobs every single day. And so I'm going to go through sort of some of the things that have caused that, because it helps to put things into perspective on what we're trying to do and what we're trying to help with. But I'm probably preaching to the converted here, and I'm not trying to sort of teach you things that you already know, but it just kind of leads nicely into what we're talking about. So the fact is that office space in Dublin is rising at a faster rate. The cost is rising at a faster rate than anywhere else in Europe. It's now, I believe, it's possibly now more expensive to get office space in Dublin as it is in Manhattan in New York. So why is that? Well, it's a market, it's supply and demand. The demand is there and the supply isn't, quite simply. And this shows really nicely what's happened with demand over the last 10 years. But when recession hit here, demand literally halved, demand for office space, and then gradually went up and up to a point where last year it was really back at the levels that it was. But when demand drops, then production stops. You stop putting up buildings, and it's not something you can just click your fingers to say, right, let's make more buildings, here they are, here's more office space, and suddenly we all go into them. And so the lack of supply and the increased demand is leading to those rising property prices. And I see a smile there because you may well have seen this in the Irish Times. First I did this presentation at an FM event in Dublin, a facilities management event in Dublin a couple of months ago, and spotted this when I was doing a bit of research, which I thought was brilliant. So this is the Irish Times. Actually, this is from March, but they monitor this every month to look at the number of cranes that are over the Dublin skyline. So it's 44 cranes. So the business is responding. The demand is the supply is being increased, but these things aren't going to just pop up. They're going to be a number of years. So for a number of years to come, you've got a situation where there's still this increased demand, and quite possibly it will continue to increase, and the supply just isn't there. So property prices will continue to increase. So this causes a problem, and clearly there's a lack of availability of commercial office space. The increasing demand leading to rising prices, as we said. So effectively, we have customers, we have tenants that they've got their leases expiring, and they might not be able to afford to stay in the same property because the price has gone up by 50% or more, or perhaps they're growing and they need more space and they can't fit into that space, and it's a considerable problem here, and it continues to be. So what's the solution? It's quite simply, it's to use less space, to fit more people in a building. And it's quite easy to do, and that's what we'll cover in the rest of this. But clearly, as it says there, that we're looking at understanding exactly how we're using the space today. So how well every single desk is performing, as I mentioned before, every banker desk, each department, each floor, each building, and look for the underutilised areas and find a way to use that space better. So, start with some numbers here. There's all sorts of numbers flying around on utilisation and what people believe their office occupancy is. We've done a lot of studies over the last couple of years, and we find average desk utilisation is at around 39-40% globally, and peak utilisation. So the busiest offices get is 64%. This is an average peak. So we looked at all the studies that we've done and took the average of that. So massive underutilisation of space, and it's similar wherever we go in the world, and whatever sector that we're talking to, whether it's private sector or public sector, it's always around the same sort of numbers. And if we put that into a building and look at actually what a building looks like, if we filled each seat one at a time, 39% shows us that this is the One Canada Square in Docklands in London. We're just getting to here if we filled these seats one at a time and we filled this building efficiently. As its busiest, we're only getting to here. Now, realistically, you don't fill a building one seat at a time, but it does help to visualise exactly how much space is being wasted within our customers. And if you could imagine, the last project that you worked on or the next project you worked on, and actually how big their office would be if they filled it correctly, based on how well it was actually used, you can start to understand the potential savings on real estate costs, whether they're staying the same, downsizing, or growing, the potential savings that could be made there. Incidentally, the first time I did this presentation, or at least this part of this presentation and this slide deck, it was in this building, and we were above the line, so we were effectively in dead space. It should never have been built. It shouldn't have been that high. So it's quite an interesting way of looking at it. Some statistics from around the world. This is a combination of our own data and some data from CBRE from last year. It's very, very similar. As I mentioned before, this isn't something that's unique to Europe or London or Dublin. It's very similar in terms of occupancy and utilisation. And why is it? It's all the things that we've just been hearing about. New ways of working and working from home and from Starbucks and the train. And still we have buildings being designed, or old buildings still being used where every single person has a desk, or maybe they've got two desks, so they've got one in each building, and so this is why we have such empty space, and there is something we can do about it. We just need to understand it. So what are the different ways of measuring space? So look, I'll start at the top actually, because this is what we do, but all the others are important as well, but obviously not quite as important as this one. We basically, we put sensors in, so little devices about the size of a smartphone. We put them under the desk. They're workstations, breakout spaces, meeting rooms, and it's infrared, and it's basically looking for heat and movement. And we take about 1,500 readings a day, so we can understand exactly how well that space is being used. So that's what we do, but there's lots of other ways of doing things. And it's interesting that actually even our company 2 years ago would tell you this is all you needed to do. This was the single most important thing that you actually needed to do. But we've learned over the years, we've sort of grown up as a business and understand the market a little bit more, that there's lots of different ways of doing things. And I was chatting with a gentleman from Space Economists earlier, and we were talking, this is the slide I was telling you about. And these are all quite interesting. There are positives and negatives of these different ways of measuring space to get the picture of your building. The simplest way and the cheapest way to find out how you're using your space is to ask staff. So you either do a survey or you go and talk to individual people and ask them, how are you using your space, or will your desks full, how often you're in the office. It's very subjective, so you might get the truthful answer, you might not. But certainly it's not going to cost you very much to get that information, and you'll see some trends and you'll get an idea of what's going on within the building, and you might get some other useful anecdotes and pieces of information as well. This is the most common way of doing studies. You walk around the building with a clipboard or often now a tablet, and you're looking at each seat and you're saying, is there somebody there, yes or no? And you walk around that building maybe 2 or 3 times a day for a couple of weeks. And And you get a good indication of what's going on within the building. There's not too much science behind it, and you get those scenarios where you see the person coming and everyone runs back to their desk and I'm here, I'm working. So it's not always accurate data. And also you can double count people. So you're in a meeting room, so you're being counted there, but you've got a mug and your jacket's on the back of your chair, so someone's gone, well, there's somebody sitting there. So then you count it twice. So the data's not always accurate. But there are some other benefits of doing this kind of study which you couldn't get with a sensor. For example, with a walkthrough study, there are observational pieces that you can capture. This person's on a tablet, a laptop, they're on a PC, on the phone, talking to a colleague, those kind of things that you can't really get with a sensor. So this is important, but in isolation probably isn't enough to understand and design the right sort of building and right size of the office. This one's nice and easy. How many people are in the building? Basically, people are swiping in and out with their security pass, and so that will give you the peaks and the troughs of exactly how many people are in that site. I won't tell you where they are, but it's easy data to get if you just want to get the maximum number in each building. This one is all about, this is an IT solution. You basically, when you plug your LAN cable into your laptop, it sends a message back and the network knows where you are, or at least the IT manager knows where you are. And it helps you to gather some long-term analytics on where people are within an office. But it's not great for a short-term study. If you've got projects coming up and your customer's saying, I really need to get to grips with where my staff are or how many people are in each department each day, a 6-month or 9-month IT project to find that out is going to take too long, which is where we come in for a lot of these pieces with the sensor studies. And it's starting to become the norm in the UK. We've done an awful lot of projects across the private and public sector. And some of these have been driven by sort of architects and designers, and some of them have been driven by customers. And we've had a couple of scenarios where so two projects, the same architect had designed a new building. One was for a government organisation, one was for a global manufacturing organisation, and they designed their new building with exactly the same number of desks and exactly the same number of meeting rooms as the old building. And so the property department at the customer has said, well, why have you done that? He said, well, the staff numbers are roughly the same, and you haven't told us that anything's changed, so we've got the same number of desks and the same number of meeting rooms. And the client was furious, both clients were furious, because over the sort of 10, 15 years since they designed that office, the world had changed an awful lot. And those two customers were customers of ours for room booking. They brought us in to do the occupancy study. The designers, the architects were made to look a little bit foolish. And then they redesigned the new office based on our data. The next time they won a project, they were straight on the phone to us saying we need to do an occupancy study. It was the first thing they wanted to do before they started working on that project. So we're starting to see a change to sort of not do this in isolation, because actually you should do these in combination, 2 or 3 of these, or possibly more, to get a really good feel of what's going on within the building. Sometimes the customer will do it for themselves, and sometimes you've got to do it for them. Otherwise, we're potentially designing buildings that are not fit for purpose. So a quick case study of a project that we worked on quite early on, about 2.5 years ago. Big global organisation. We were working with them at their head office in London, their UK head office in London in Hammersmith. The head of property there was very aware that there were lots of spare desks in his office, and he wanted to close 2 small buildings and move 300 people into the head office. So the office seated 1,000 people, just wanted to find seats for another 300. And he went round to all the different department heads and said, this is what I'm trying to do. It's going to save us lots of money when we can cancel these leases. And each department head said, no, we're using all our space, we're really busy. And as you can imagine, they would do. And he said to them, well, I can see that you're not using all this space. Last week, half your team weren't here. And then the department heads all start making excuses. Well, we had a busy week, there was a project, we were off-site, we had some holiday. And so that was it. It goes no further unless you do the occupancy study and get some real data. So we put in 1,000 sensors across that building. And about 6 weeks in, it became obvious that there were about 150 desks that were never used, not used at all. And another, a similar number, 100 to 150, that were used less than 40% of the time. And that was all the evidence that he needed to go back to the different department heads and said, I know you said you weren't using your space, but look, I've been doing a study and here's the evidence. And by the way, I'm having 30 seats back and another 20 here and 50 there. And he got the 300 seats that he needed, and he moved the 300 people into that office, and he closed 2 buildings, and he saved 2.2 million pounds a year, every year. That's a saving every year. So it's not hard to do, you just need the data, and they redesigned their office to fit those people in and introduced some new technologies, and they brought in some room and desk booking as well from us as well. But it's, this was a perfect example of fitting more people in a building and make better utilisation out of space. In this case, it was a saving, I think, for many of your customers. It will be not having to spend more money on a new office or a larger office if they're expanding. This is marketing people putting in fancy slides, but apparently that's 6,864 iPhone 6s every year, 2.2 million pounds. So just putting things into numbers. This is a screenshot from our dashboard. So I'm going to show you this, show you some more data actually. So I mentioned before, we collect the data using sensors. We send the data actually over the internet using a mobile data card into the cloud. So it's not an IT solution at all. And then we present the data back to our customers in a portal, so they get to see. For their desks, meeting rooms, breakout spaces, offices as well if they're measuring that. And you can start to see the analytics. And this is what I was talking about before with the averages and the peaks. This is dummy data, by the way. This isn't customer data. But the chap from GE, what he did was he looked at these boxes here: 15 desks never used, 48 desks 1 to 20, 107 21 to 40. You know, those are the quick wins. Those are the easy wins. And you can click on those boxes, and you can see the actual seats that are never utilised. And notice this is anonymous. This isn't about monitoring people. This isn't an HR tool. This is a property tool. So we don't put people's names in here. So very, very easy to see the underutilised areas. You get some interesting trends, sort of looking at averages through the day and AM, PM through the week. And then on the meeting rooms as well, which I think is even more fascinating, as well as getting the utilisation, knowing how well used the if we're still on the internet, this will change. Yes, good. How well utilised the meeting rooms are. We get occupancy as well. We know how many people are in the meeting rooms. So here we can see there's 54% average utilisation, and then for every meeting room, we can see the percentage utilisation, the peak occupancy, and the average occupancy against the size of the meeting room. And this is dummy data, but this is the kind of thing we usually see, you know, big conference rooms that are used by 2 people, by 3 people. And you can go even deeper into, in terms of granularity, and see on a particular meeting room every single week of the study, and each day within that as well. So I can pick a week, so we picked the 2nd to the 6th of June last year, and I can go and look at every single day and see, you know, the meetings that are taking place in here and how many people are in this 12-person meeting room. So we've got utilisation and occupancy. So they're very different numbers. And room booking systems only tell you the utilisation, but the occupancy is really important. And we've had projects where we've, you know, very quickly we've gone in and shown that these large conference rooms are being used by 1, 2, 3 people all the time, and the customer, they don't need so many large meeting rooms, and quite quickly they come in and put a partition across the meeting room, turn it into 2, because they know they don't need quite as much space there. Okay, so I think I'm sort of running towards the end of my time. Just one final slide, which sort of shows everything that we do. Things have gone a bit wrong there, sorry, in terms of the writing, but this shows everything that we do on one page effectively. So we've been talking largely about occupancy sensors, but we also provide the room booking and the desk booking through software, through Outlook add-ins, through mobile apps, kiosks, wayfinders, interactive room screens. So this is sort of the perfect Condeco customer, the ones that buy everything from us. But ultimately, it's about measuring and managing. So we've been talking today about measuring and how to understand how a building's being used. But we also have the technology to come in and manage that space better through scheduling. And I think that's it for my slides.